Success Insight shares the stories of the people with passion and drive who make things happen in the world. Here's your host, Howard Fox.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Career Focus series on the Success Insight podcast. Our guest today is Scott Christianson, Associate Teaching Professor at the University of Missouri. Scott's interests are focused on the impact of emerging technology on society and geopolitics. He loves mentoring students with their business and tech ideas, exploring new ideas, and geeking out about technology. Scott, it's a pleasure to have you on the Career Focus series on the Success Insight podcast.
Well, thanks so much for having me. I'm looking forward to a good conversation.
Fantastic. And for our listeners, I get an email from a group that introduces me to potential podcast guests. And normally I would delete the email, but I came across Scott and this magical word, artificial intelligence. And again, Scott, I am so glad that you were willing to accept me as a potential host to you, because this is a phenomenal and very important topic today.
Yes. And it's creeping into all aspects of our lives. You're talking about finding a job or career success. There's a lot of ways that AI is being used in what I think is some really good ways, as well as some ways that maybe we might want to question a little bit when it comes to HR and things like that.
Okay. And perhaps we can chat about bits and pieces of the good, the bad,
Sure.
and maybe there's some telltale signs or some best practices we can leave our listeners with. And you spoke about the word career, and I definitely want to get into that. And I see that even in my profession as a coach outside of podcasting. But for our listeners who maybe they've heard about AI, but they don't know really what it is, maybe you can provide a little bit of context to that term.
Yeah. So AI is a very broad term, and I would say it could be defined as any sort of machine that exhibits a decision-making ability or a cognitive or decision-making ability. Now, that may be as simple as your Roomba, right? So your little vacuum that runs around, it says, oh, I've hit a wall. I'm going to decide to turn to the right. Okay, that is a decision-making ability or an algorithm that has been programmed by some human being. And that's a very narrow intelligence, just limited to a very narrow area. Of course, in the movies, we see general artificial intelligence where we have robots that can reason and they can take information they've learned in one place and use it in another place. They can have conversations with people and can do things just like people can. That is not here yet, and I'm becoming more skeptical that it ever will be, but we are seeing some pretty amazing stuff in an area called machine learning or deep learning. And this is where we can have a machine, that is a computer, that has some ability to look at historical data, to be trained on that historical data, and then make decisions about what the future might be like. And so this is often used for image recognition. And a great example that how it's probably going to affect both of our lives, Howard, is in medicine. So when radiologists are now looking at x-rays, it's not just a human that's looking at those x-rays or this imaging data. It's actually a machine learning algorithm in some cases that has been trained on a huge amount of historical data and then can, at a glance and much faster than a human and more accurately than a human, say, oh, Scott has pneumonia. I predict with a high probability he has pneumonia. It's not 100%, just like your doctor's not 100%. But that's one way that I think is going to help a lot of people is this new field called machine learning. And it continues to develop. And it's a lot of what we see in the artificial intelligence that's creeping into our lives in different ways.
Okay. And I do appreciate and want to thank you for sharing that what we see in the movies, not that I watch a lot of movies, but what we see in the movies is just the movies. It's really not reality. And I do appreciate also that you said, I don't have a lot of, let's just use the word faith at this point, that's even going to become a reality. That makes me feel good about that. As far as the machine learning, I love this idea that I am gathering up data wherever that data is, whatever form and type of data it is. In the medical field, there is a lot of it, and the fact that you can then capture it and continue to, I would imagine that data is continually expanding or evolving, and our precision about the types of decisions that can be made from reviewing the data is always improving upon itself.
Yeah, and it can be very effective, and it does get better the more data it has. The more it's used, it can get better and better. There can be some problems, however, if we aren't careful about the data set that we train things with. So, for example, we know that heart problems exhibit themselves differently in men versus women. So, if we train our AI to recognize this person might be having a heart attack based on their symptoms and other data, well, maybe that AI is great for a white male, but is not good for a Latino woman, right? So we really have to think about where's our data set coming from? Is it variable enough? Is it have that variability that really reflects the variability of the population we want to use? So there's all sorts of issues that can arise, but it can be extremely effective.
Okay. If we now shift, let's say, well, first, I'm curious about the work at the university and you're teaching with students. How are students coming into the university learning about AI, machine learning? How are they and I have to think they're coming into your class not just because you are a fantastic professor and this is the topic of all topics, but they have to have perhaps had an interest in this topic with a desire to want to perhaps use it in their future profession. So how is that conversation and that learning growing, evolving in the work that you do with those students?
Well, I am primarily teaching in the business school, and we're really starting to think about how is our profession going to change based on working alongside these new tools. So when we come to things like accounting, where we have a lot of students specializing in forensic accounting, trying to do fraud detection, all sorts of like looking for exceptions and things like that. Well, now we start to realize that we can train an AI on here's what normal transactions look like. And now we're going to use that AI to detect if in our University of Missouri system, we got somebody that's committing fraud, right? So, and of course, that occurs in any big system. That's just part of human nature, I guess. And so, what a lot of we're talking about is how do we work alongside these systems? How do we understand when they're useful and when they're not useful? Once again, think about something like HR. I could say, well, I'm going to take all the resumes and CVs of all the professors that we have that have been successful in getting tenure, and we will then train an AI to screen all our new applicants so that we can see who we just want to hire people that are going to get tenure. Well, that's great, and that would probably work, but are all our tenured professors old white guys like me? Well, then maybe that's not so great of a data set, right? And so even in HR and management, we're talking about these topics of here's a really useful tool and it could maybe eliminate human bias, but are we introducing some other bias? And so really just trying to understand these tools, these data sets, and some of the basics. We have some great work going on right now in the engineering department as well. So we sometimes get to talk with those guys about how they're doing things like autonomous vehicles, all this kind of cool stuff. And so it's a great place to be and to learn about this topic.
Okay. If I am someone who does not have a college degree or has a college degree, but let us just say the degree doesn't necessarily guarantee a reasonably paying job with a reasonable quality of life. Okay, whatever that might be. How can I begin to explore and ask questions as I'm talking to the career center at my local university? Which professions would perhaps meet my interests Okay. This is
Mhm.
what I'm interested in. These are my talents. But also have a sense that this job, maybe students don't even think about this. I don't know. This job, I'm going to have a profession 10 years down the line, 20 years down the line, and where AI and machine learning are not going to somehow come in 10 years, 15, 20 years down the line and make me obsolete.
Well,
That's a loaded question.
yeah, so it's so so one, the good thing is that there are all other alternatives than a university degree. I have a lot of criticisms about the current university system, but it is what it is. But
Right.
there's lots of great places where you can get certified, and these are really good certifications in different IT fields, including areas like AI. So Coursera has partnered with a number of universities, and you can get a certification there that's, I think, recognized. Google has certifications. CompTIA has certifications for technical work or security. I always tell my career advice, and you can tell me if this is a poor career advice to give to students, is that you always want to be at the intersection. So if you can be the carpenter that also understands something about AI and analytics, okay, that's a good place to be. If you can be the accountant that also knows about art history, okay, because that singles you out as kind of a unique individual. And so I think too many times we kind of tunnel students in this one little area. Okay, I got this finance certification, this finance certification, this finance certification, this finance certification. I'm like, okay, so all you know is finance, right? So, so why don't you also get the trade certification or supply chain or something a little bit adjacent to your field? And so I would really look at it that way: is how can I not just augment what I already do or already know, but how can I at least have some degree of mastery of another field and be that intersection? So I kind of look at myself and my own career. There's really a lot of really good teachers out there. I'm certainly not the best, but I'm certainly not the worst. There's a lot of good technology guys out there. I'm not the best, but I'm not the worst either. But there's very few technologists that really like hanging out in the classroom, right? So it's kind of be that intersection is what I tell people.
I love that. And by the way, that I think that is great career advice. My perspective is we have to be willing to continue to learn for the rest of our lives, because whether you and I are the same age range or not, our parents potentially had a career and that was it. And I see today kids coming out of university or a community college, you have to be willing to learn for the rest of your life. And those places, the Coursera's, the Udemy's, et
Yeah.
cetera, are great ways to go about continuing down that educational path.
Yeah.
If
I-
if you have say individuals in organizations that are finding themselves maybe being companies have a way of embracing technology before they actually understand the systemic impact of embracing the technology. So it's like a McDonald's, for the sake of a better word. I'm just making them up. Hopefully McDonald's is not going to sue me, but in 5 years, nobody's going to be taking your order at McDonald's. It's all going to be done by machine. Okay.
Yeah.
And I think that's going to be a reality. However, how do we begin to use or understand AI to stay relevant in say, the work that we are doing? Perhaps it's not this profession where I can have these niches that there's some overlap, but somebody really just never really thought about it. How can I continue to grow and this impact that AI is now having on my life?
Yeah, I think that one, you've got to kind of look out and look around you. For example, and you're talking about organizations adopting things without really understanding the impact. The university is not immune to that either. We adopted Microsoft 360, the cloud-based email. And all of a sudden, I started to get these little suggestions like, hey, Scott, would you like to get back to Howard about this and that? And I'm like, okay, wait a second. What the heck's this? And I started to realize, oh, there's an AI, a machine learning algorithm that is reading my emails every morning and is then deciding what I might want to do with the day. Now, to me, I don't like that. I'm like,
Right.
I want to be able to decide this. Other people, they're like, oh, yeah, that's great. I love it because then I can allocate time for those commitments. But there's all this type of stuff that's kind of creeping into our lives, and it's sometimes difficult to recognize. But I would say just stop and think about how different systems influence your behavior. So there's a reason why TikTok is addictive, why you spend time on Facebook. And if you don't really believe me that things are seeping and creeping, I challenge you and your listeners to pick up your phone and to look at how much time you spend on these different apps. And when I challenge my students, they all of a sudden realize, wait a second, I spend 30 hours a week on these different apps. And it started out small, but it just got bigger and bigger and bigger. And social media is probably the biggest use of AI. And unfortunately, that AI is there to drive ad clicks and not necessarily to engage in constructive dialogue. Right. So I'm going to get into my little bubble, my little political bubble, and maybe they'll send me something about how these other people are awful, and makes me mad and makes me click on stuff. Well, to the AI, they're like, okay, that's awesome. He's now clicked on more stuff. Not, oh, we've just sown disinformation and further divided Americans. It's the AI has done its job. And so I would really look there first if you're starting to think about that. I know that really is not answering your original question there, but yeah, it's in our lives, whether we like it or not.
In how can we as consumers or students be can we have an impact on what we are being presented with? Is it as simple as ignoring the pop-up, or committing that I'm only going to spend 20 minutes or 30 minutes on Facebook or TikTok, or again, do I have to go cold turkey on this?
Well, I think a detox every once in a while is a good idea because it helps check back and then you start to realize how much you're using it. I love Reddit. I watch various videos and stuff on Reddit, but I give myself about 20 minutes in the morning when I'm having my coffee and waking up. And I don't use it throughout the rest of the day. I only have it on my home iPad. And so you have to set boundaries for yourself. It's not that you're a bad person for being on social media. And in fact, some studies have found that as far as the happiness goes, what happens is a little bit of social media is actually probably a good thing. It actually drives up your happiness, but it's when you spend too much time on it that it then kind of goes down, the payoff goes down, right?
Okay. So back to the career focus, because this is the career focus series. Many of my clients that I work with, they are inside of a company already, and the company provides some good internal mobility. So perhaps the AI is not really as big a factor versus I have my resume. Let's say it's well constructed. I've helped my client to craft it. We've got good keywords, good sentences, nothing that's going to kick it out, so to speak, from
Sure.
an applicant tracking system. What is the impact of AI to really help me ensure that my resume is at least going to be considered before I get a letter that says thank you, but no thank you, but hey, thank you, and we want to talk to you? Because I see it as a very distinct area, salt and pepper, oil and water area. I don't see the gray area there, but as someone who is an expert in AI and machine learning, is there a gray area in this submission of a resume, and to at least have it considered if this person's qualified?
Oh, I think that there's a lot of services out there that will rewrite your resume or make suggestions. I tell my students I use Grammarly. That's great. A tool for cover letters and things like that. I will also get a lot of human feedback as well. But I think that there's some interesting AI applications if you're interested in finding out about the personality of people. There's one called Crystal Knows, and it's a plugin. And basically, you can sign up for free. I think they let you do 10 queries for free. And I would link with you on LinkedIn. And then I would be able to use this plugin, and it would say, well, Howard likes to have things addressed quickly. Or Howard really doesn't, he needs to get to know you before he wants to get down to business. So it'd have different aspects about your personality, what motivates you, what communication style is going to work well with you, how to formulate an email to reach out to Howard. So it's kind of interesting. It is somewhat accurate, I think. I've tried this on several friends and other folks I've known, and I think it's somewhat accurate for myself. It also said several things like I would like to work independently, which is very much true. There were a couple other things like he's inquisitive. Well, I'm not going to say no, I'm not. So it's kind of like the psychic sometimes. You got to wonder like, oh, the psychic never always says something about, I feel like you have untapped potential. And then you say, oh yeah, well, I've got untapped potential. Psychic never says like, well, you pretty much reached the maximum of your potential, Scott. There's no place for you to go, or nobody's going to say, "Oh, no, I don't have untapped potential. I have no more potential." So some of the wording that comes back from that AI kind of makes me wonder if it's a little bit of psychic reading or something. But other aspects were on target, and I think those will become better and better. And so, especially for salespeople, is what they're aiming it for right now. So, if you're making a cold call or something like that, what kind of approach to take. But you could also use that same approach with trying to get a new job or trying to move up in your current position. Know what the personalities are, the people that you're going to be reporting to or interviewing with.
Sure. No, as a coach, I totally appreciate the intersection of personality and behavioral theory. We're not always, again, cut and dry. There are some gray areas within us, but I've lost a couple opportunities because I'm very much a conscientious, introverted person. But that's okay. It is what it is. I'm curious with the advent of AI, machine learning, and technology is changing just so quickly now. Where do you see the big, I mean, you talked a little bit about the healthcare, but where else within our we mentioned the autonomous vehicles, where else in our lives, especially, how again, we want to, right now we're in survival mode. I think we still are. There's a lot going on in this world, but where do you see AI and machine learning continuing to have a big impact on our lives that we really need to become aware and get to know about it?
Well, I think that unfortunately, one of the things that's probably going to happen is more sophisticated scamming attempts. So you've probably got those phishing emails, and
Oh, yeah.
if you look at them, they're pretty darn good nowadays.
Yeah.
So they got the Netflix logo, and oh, we couldn't process your Netflix payment, and well, I want to get that fixed right away, right? So click this link and enter your credit card. There's been same sort of thing done, but using AI to recreate someone's voice. So if you were the CFO of a company or the CEO of a company, I could recreate your voice. I could take all the podcasts you've done. I could train an AI on it. And there's a program actually built for podcasters called Descript, where
I use Descript.
yeah. So you've trained it on your voice. And so if you tell your listeners to tune in next Tuesday and you really meant to say next Wednesday, well, you can go and edit that afterward, right? And you don't even have to say the words Wednesday. It will do that for you. But imagine something like that on steroids, but being used for nefarious purposes. Or maybe I'm a relative of yours and you get a phone call that says, Howard, this is Scott. I don't know. The police say I killed somebody with my car, but I don't know what happened. Hey, there's this lawyer here. Can you please talk to him? I really need help. And then I hand you off to some person that's going to say, yeah, I'm representing Mr. Christianson, but we need $2,000 to be able to retain that. Well, this is often targeted against old people. And my mom gets these types of calls right now. They're not AI driven, but I can imagine a time at which they would be AI driven. This has been done against CEOs, and there's been some big cases where millions of dollars was scammed this way. And I can see that kind of coming down to our level. And so one of the things you really need to do is kind of educate yourself and then also educate your family members about these more sophisticated schemes that are coming down, where you are, maybe even have a word that you would say. I'm going to say hedgehog if there's ever anything wrong. Okay. So you'll remember if I say hedgehog.
Right. Right.
And
Okay. So that was the bad stuff, and believe me, I could get something like that, and if it's not once a week, it's every other week at least. What are some of the areas that are going to continue to evolve for the better? Whether, I mean, again, we talked about medicine, education. Where else is this going to continue to evolve to make us better, make society better, give us more of an opportunity to move forward and enjoy ourselves and appreciate what we have?
yeah, I think there's going to be lots of interesting areas. I think medicine that we already talked about is one. Autonomous vehicles, if they ever get that figured out, could save millions of lives. I think that would be a big advantage for humanity, and certainly consider the healthcare costs that are associated with automobile injuries and deaths every year. I think there's some interesting areas with mobility as far as actually aerial drones carrying people or carrying packages. So we've already seen that in Africa with being able to deliver supplies. I think it's
Right.
called Zipline, I think is the name of the company that's been fairly successful there. And so they can take a package 30 miles and maybe it's got some life-saving medicine, and maybe it's very dangerous or very just lengthy to get through an area. And so I think that's going to be one area that we'll see some good work done. For the pandemic, unfortunately, pandemics are independent events, right? We could
Right.
have the next pandemic tomorrow. And so I think we're going to see more predictive abilities to be able to say, okay, this is spreading right now. And what could this turn into if we don't catch it right now? And so I think there's a lot of possibilities there. I think in areas like supply chain, which has been hit very hard by the pandemic, and a lot of folks are rethinking that area, there's going to be some good uses of AI. And I tell my students as well that supply chain and cybersecurity are two areas that are not going to be replaced by an AI anytime soon, because they're both very unique and need that human touch involved. And those are going to be the areas where they have to learn to work with these AIs. So
Okay. Okay. For your students and the projects that they are working on, is there a project? And again, if you can't share this, I totally get it, confidentiality. But is there an example of a project that, Scott, you like took a step back and you said, "Wow, that's pretty good."
well, we have a couple actually, and I'll give you two examples. One is from a PhD student that I'm on his committee for. He is a very interesting person. He's from Colombia, South America, and he is studying Romance languages. But he is looking at Romance languages and the literature of certain genres of literature. To be honest, I don't understand a lot of what he talks about in that area, but he's training an AI on some of this genre and being able to create new stories. And what he's really even looking at is how could we create stories that maximize the interest and fun of a particular individual using AI. So maybe Howard, he likes to see the blood and guts and action and stuff like that. And Scott likes to just they walk through the woods and it's all nice and everything. And so it's kind of like the choose your own adventure stuff that you used to have when you were a kid. And but in this case, it's AI driven and it's based on things like how much we're sweating or whether our heart rate is going up and whether we're having pleasure in this or not. And so that's a very interesting one to kind of choose your own adventure with an AI driven narrator, I guess, or writer for you. And so he's been exploring some of these very new AIs, GPT-3, where he can feed all this in and have a new story written. So it's pretty amazing stuff there. Then we have another company here in town that's doing some amazing work. I think they're using some sort of AI, but they're actually doing VR. And so very similar work, but they're in the VR world. And what they're trying to do is trying to help you calm your brain. So
Mm.
like people from post-traumatic stress. And so they actually have a thing that hooks up and looks at your brainwave patterns. And then it shows you patterns and you concentrate and the patterns change. And so they're trying to use that for mental health. And so it's kind of interesting about, could you use this type of technology to help people with their mental health?
Wow, it's we've come a long way from the Commodore 64. Let me tell you that.
Yes.
So,
Although some days I wish I was back
I'm right there with you. I'm behind you, man. I would like to. I just want a pencil and paper sometimes. As you, and maybe you've just kind of described this a little bit, but an aha moment that as you look back as a teaching professor, and I mean, it takes a commitment. Number one, to be a professor, you have to want to interact. We can be introverted and be very happy being on our own and doing our work and being happy, but you have a big impact on your students. And I'm curious, as a professor working with the students, what's been your aha moment with them?
Oh, well, I mean, I've had a lot of aha moments, and I'm blessed with that every semester. Sometimes it's just when a student writes me that they finally got a job at their dream job at some company, and they didn't think that they could do any work in IT because they weren't a computer science major, and they thank me for that. I also have students that have gone off and started their own companies. One young woman, Sierra May, started a company called Rebundle, and it's doing very well. And so we have another student that they have a high protein waffle, and they're doing gangbusters right now as well. And so I have lots of aha moments. And so it's a very rewarding second career for me.
That's second career. What was the first?
I ran my own IT business for many,
Ah,
many years. And so I'm what they call professionally qualified. So I don't have a PhD,
okay.
but I teach information systems, project management, emerging technologies, the kind of stuff I did in my business. So.
Okay. Okay. Thinking about again, getting back into the future, is there an article, a book, some insight that you want to leave our listeners with about getting to know more about this topic? And, you know, it's perhaps, yes, it's complex, but you can consume this and read it and get something from it and become more aware, because I think we need to become more aware of this topic.
There's a couple good ones. If you're wanting to explore some of the, I guess I would say the uses of AI where maybe we're handing over too much to algorithms, there's a book. I'm blanking on the author's last name, but the book is titled Weapons of Math Destruction. And it's about how algorithms are used and sometimes misused. And I think if you're interested in human resources, that would be an excellent one to look at. There's also another one here that I have that's called Rebooting AI, Building Artificial Intelligence We Can Trust. And that's another really good one looking at some of these aspects that we've been talking about what makes a good application for an AI.
Okay.
So I would recommend those. And YouTube also has some really good videos that have been put together to explain some of the basics.
Okay. Fair. Sounds like a plan. And before we head out, is there anything else that you'd like to share? Final wisdom, insight for our listeners?
Well, just remember that the future is ours to make. Okay. So we get to make what the future, and every single little thing, every little button there on my mixer, every little button there on the Zoom call, somebody decided that. It just didn't happen. Right. And so when we talk about the future, I think it's always good to envision the future. I think these movies where we see AI, that's good too, because it sometimes gives us a dark vision of the future, and that helps us avoid that dark future, right? So just realize the future is ours to create, and we get to decide how we want these technologies to be deployed. And so don't just let the future happen to you.
Okay. Fair enough. And I'm thinking too, you're in Missouri. One of my favorite podcast authors and she wrote a couple books, and we're not to get into any politics of the sort, but there's a political leaning here. But I'm curious because she goes out hiking with her family. When you're not teaching at the university, working with students, what do you do for fun?
We do a lot of camping and hiking. So we do some of that here in Missouri. We have a wonderful trail. It's actually, I can access it about 2 blocks away from my house. I'm in Columbia, Missouri, and then I can ride 8 miles down to the MKT trail, and that's a 230-mile trail across Missouri.
Wow.
And so we do a lot of biking there. And yeah, Arkansas is also a beautiful state to visit as well. So we like to go camping all throughout the Midwest.
Sounds like a plan. That's great. Now, Scott, before we head out, if our listeners would like to learn more about you and your work, where are the best places for them to go?
Yeah. So because of the way it uses AI, I ditched my Facebook account many years ago and I started my own little Substack newsletter to share what I'm reading, what I think is interesting with my friends and colleagues. It's kind of cool. There's about 1,500 people who have subscribed so far. It's called the Free Range Technologist. And I think maybe you'll put that in the show notes, but it's not selling anything or anything like that, but it's resources that I found that are useful. So I try and share those out. Well, probably twice a month.
I love that. And we will definitely provide the backlink to the Free Range Technologist. And let me tell you, if I could get rid of Facebook and Instagram and Twitter, and I'm about ready to get on TikTok, I cannot believe that. I was at a conference a week and a half ago, and the communications marketing presentation said, you got to get on TikTok. It's like, oh my God. But I may have to check out Substack, but definitely will provide those backlinks. And this has been a very interesting conversation, and I appreciate you taking the time. And we've covered a lot of information between what is machine learning and AI, the good and the bad. But it sounds to me that coming away from this, Scott, there is a good future. We just need to be diligent about it and go forward with our eyes wide open.
Exactly. Well, thanks so much for having me. It was a wonderful conversation.
Fantastic. Listen, stay on the line. We're going to have a final chat, but I just want to do a quick close for us. Okay.
Thanks.
Very good. All right, folks. What a fascinating conversation we've just had with Scott Christianson, associate teaching professor at the University of Missouri. And today we have been learning about machine learning, artificial intelligence. And as I alluded to at the onset of today's episode, I discovered Scott when I was perusing potential podcast guests. And I thought, well, this is going to be an interesting topic because AI and machine learning, it is having an effect on my profession as a coach, business coaching, career coaching, but it's also having an effect on who my clients are and how these tools are affecting their success, not only in the ability to land a job, but also to be successful in the long term, for the long term in that profession, because things are changing, folks, and we have to continually change as well. And I think we've been gifted with some great resources. The books, the Rebooting AI, Weapons of Mutual.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Though the book?
The book.
Oh, Weapons of Math Destruction.
Math Destruction. I can't even read my own writing. So the Weapons of Math Destruction, we're going to get the backlink to that from our favorite bookseller. And also definitely Scott's writing and the work on the Free Range Technologist on Substack, that'll be very useful to you as well. And I think, again, this topic, it's in our consciousness right now. We hear about it all the time. And in fact, we are affected by it almost all the time, because if we're on social media, there's AI and machine learning right behind the scenes there. And we have to understand that, as Scott had shared, we have control. We get to decide what we do or don't do. So we have a choice. Now, if you enjoyed today's episode of the Career Focus series on the Success Insight podcast, please visit us on Facebook, Success Insight podcast page, as well as LinkedIn. There's another AI story I could have shared. We have our page there, Success Insight Podcast, and we have our webpage, successinsightpodcast.com. And as far as podcasts are concerned, we are on all of the podcast directories. So please go out there and listen to this episode. Let us know what you think, whether you liked it. If you did, share it, comment on it, and let us know how your life is going to change as a result of it. Okay, folks, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, go out there, have a phenomenal day. And we will see you on a future episode of the Career Focus series on the Success Insight podcast. Take care now.
Success Insight is a production of Fox Coaching and First Story Strategies. Find us online, successinsightpodcast.com.